So I will provide a brief introduction of the ambassador. Following her remarks, there will be a chance for you to ask questions and to interact. And what will happen is when that part comes, we'll ask you to raise your hand. Kelly, in the Kelly green dress, will have a microphone to come. Please wait for the microphone. Stand up, tell the ambassador your name, what you're studying, if you're a student, or what other interest you have here, and then we'll proceed in that way. Nicole Bintner-Bakshian is the ambassador of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg to the United States, based in Washington, D.C., and non-resident ambassador to Canada and Mexico. She has been Deputy Chief of Mission in Beijing, People's Republic of China, and Bangkok, Thailand, and was Luxembourg's first ambassador to the United Arab Emirates. In 2017, she set up Luxembourg's first regional embassy in Dakar, Senegal, covering Burkina Faso, Mali, and Nigeria as well, while also serving as the country's Special Envoy to the Sahel region. So please join me in welcoming Her Excellency Nicole Bintner-Bakshian to BYU.
Good afternoon, everybody, or as we say in Luxembourgish, I know there are some Luxembourgish speakers here, moyenne. I'm really honored to be here. I know this is the tough spot after lunch when everybody, is digesting. But I will try my best. So thank you so much for your kind introduction, and thanks, for having me here today. These events are for me very important because it gives an engagement with the community. I know this is a very outgoing university with a global reach. I mean, just the questions you have asked and seeing how many of you have been abroad, how many of you speak other languages, is just a testimony to, I think, the unique position you are in here in Provo. So in that context, I'm really the more so happy to be here. So who has been to Luxembourg apart from the ones who live in Luxembourg? Oh, it's not bad. Not bad. So that is great. So what comes to mind when you hear about Luxembourg? Does anybody have something in mind? When you say Luxembourg, does it mean anything to you? Money? In what sense? You've got a lot of it. We have to work for it. I think Luxembourg is indeed known for the financial center, which is very important, and I will say a word about this later on. What I find often when I ask in the US, when I go around Luxembourg, they say, well, the usual answer I get, Germany? I said, no. We are next to it. Then some who are more daring, they say, mountains and skiing? I said, no, that's the other L country, that's Liechtenstein, or it could be Utah for that matter. So, then there are some tech-savvy ones, they will say space. Luxembourg has been developing a lot of space industry and commercial space activities. And then the more politically savvy, they might actually know that we are a NATO ally when I am in Washington. So that comes out more often. So just to see a little bit how we go about that, if you want, I give you a little background, maybe on Luxembourg and on the history of the very strong relationship between the US and Luxembourg and how that came about. And I think then we open it up into a discussion, because I'm sure you will have lots of questions, but I'm also interested in hearing your comments on where we stand today. So maybe I just met with your president, who is a statistician. So let me just give you a few numbers. Okay. So 1,000. That's the size, 1,000 square miles. So that's the size of Luxembourg. So for those in the US, to picture it, it's about the size of Rhode Island. So you see, it's really, really small. 1. Can you find it on the map? I think it's very, very small. One. So that's why I'm very honored that you are here still. Is only one Grand Duchy in the world. So we are a constitutional monarchy. Our head of state is the Grand Duke, who has representational powers but no legislative powers. Then 675,000. That's the number of inhabitants. So Luxembourg City is about half the size of Salt Lake City. So you see the country is small, is even fewer people than for one representative on the Hill. 170, you should note him, 170 nationalities. So it's a very, very international place. About half of our population have different citizenship from Luxembourgish. And now this is something which is very relevant in this room. 3. Exactly. Very good. Well, Rosie sat next to me at lunch. So we have 3 official languages. So actually, we speak Luxembourgish, which is a Germanic language, so very similar to German, but with a lot of French influence. We learn to read and write in German, and then we learn French when we are 7 years old, like in grade 2. So, which makes it pretty complex for some students because it's really very tough to learn all these languages, and French is a very different language from our basic reference system. And then we learn English. So even though English isn't an official language, it is being used for business. You can do all your tax filings, all your registration, all your papers in English. So my husband, who is with us today, he can testify that after initial problems of not sure whether he was buying beef or lamb, in the end, you can get by with English. So, and the last number, 3.6. What could that be? It's in relation to languages as well. That's about the average amount of languages spoken per person. So, and, we need to have it. And this actually brings me to the question with which I wanted to start this. How can there be such a small country like Luxembourg? That's, I think, a question which I get a lot when I am in the US. It's a little bit mesmerizing. And I think the answer is quite easy, quite simple. And that explains also all the languages. We are landlocked, so we feel like with Utah, we feel similar for that. We are landlocked, but we are wedged in between Germany, France, and Belgium. And we have always existed, and I know there are some history majors here and history specialists, and we have always been wedged in on this fault line between the Germanics and the Celtics, so between the French and the Germans, and which kind of explains why, the ones didn't want us to be with the others didn't want us to be with the ones, so which is why we are there. And I'm not going, history nerds can get into that. We have, Europe has a very difficult and complicated history between all the different peoples and populations from Middle Age on. We say that the Luxembourg origins go back to the 10th century. For the ones who've been to Luxembourg, Luxembourg City is built on this castle, which was like a fortification which was like virtually untakeable. So again, at the crossroads of all these paths and routes there. So we look at the country as we have now, going back to 1839. So since 1839, Luxembourg has been existing in its current form, in its current size, as an independent country. Our head of state then was still the king of the Netherlands, but then later on, through a succession treaty of the Nassau, it became the Grand Duke, who took over at the late 19th century. So where were we? And I think where were we at that time, at the late 19th century? And that brings me also to tie our history into our relationship with the US. So Luxembourg was a very poor agrarian nation. The soils were not very fertile, so we had about 1/3 of our population which emigrated to the US. I don't know whether anybody of Luxembourg origin is here. Not necessarily. Yes, you have some. You have some from Echternach. So we had like 1/3 of the country, they left because of poverty. And then, and this is again something which is similar to Utah, in around 1860, 1870s, we discovered iron ore. So Luxembourg started to have its first wealth as mineral wealth. And so the country started to develop the extraction of iron ore and the transformation. And with that, we developed a high-performing steel industry. But like with minerals, they run out. So there is, of course, now no more iron ore. We still maintain a steel industry for very high quality steel products, like normally the very thin beams you find in the high-rises, like in the Freedom Towers in New York, they are all made in Luxembourg. So this is how the country started to create the wealth, and that is interesting also with Utah, and we were talking a lot, and I think we will talk a lot tomorrow also about the mineral wealth here and the importance of the mineral wealth to move forward. Then, of course, Europe, 20th century, two devastating world wars. Luxembourg got invaded twice by Germany, who considered it to be part of Germany, but Luxembourgers never accepted that. During World War II, our head of state, lady then, Grand Duchess Charlotte, actually was in exile in the US and in Canada because President Kennedy said you will be a more effective leader for your country in the US. Her family fled just when the German troops were entering the country. And so we got liberated twice by the Allied troops and by the US troops. And this is something which is really very important and fundamental in the relationship we have with the US. Because if it wasn't for the courage of these soldiers and the Battle of the Bulge, I think a lot of you know about the Battle of the Bulge, we have over 5,000 servicemen and one woman buried in Luxembourg in a beautiful resting place, together with General Patton, who is buried there as well. And that has just tied us very closely to the US to this day. And this is something we don't forget, and we had recently we had the 80th anniversary commemorations. We are going to come to the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. So, especially today when we look at geopolitics, important to remember also where we came from. And I think for some of you who study political sciences, who study history, so what did this mean for Luxembourg? Luxembourg was a neutral country. I didn't go into all that history, but of course, after what happened during the two world wars, there was no more, we couldn't remain neutral. Neutrality was not an option after we were liberated twice. So we became founding members of all the multilateral institutions, be it the Bretton Woods institutions, but be it the United Nations, be it NATO, and then the European Union. So, which is very important, which is a very important one for us, because being so small, our DNA is quintessentially international. We don't look at us like only Luxembourg, we look at us like part of Europe and part of the world, really. So that is really when our whole situation changed, and we became very committed in the multilateral institutions and in the growth of them. I don't want to do a history lesson on the building of the EU, but the EU really came about by us wanting to make war impossible. Us meaning the Benelux countries, Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg, France, Italy, and Germany. So we decided to put our steel and coal industries together to have it much more efficient, to have one market rather than 6 fragmented markets, and through that have Germany as an ally and as a friend rather than on the opposing side. So I think when you look at Europe, something even 80 years later, what I always say, never forget that the Europe you have now and the European Union is in essence a peace project. And that sadly often gets forgotten. So, and also when we look at where do we stand today and where do we need to go from here. So maybe I'm just saying a last few words. What are the things mostly on our agenda? Because I think that might be interesting for you, in my work in Washington. And then I think we open it up to the floor so that we can, that we can exchange. Of course, the single most important issue in our daily work in Washington is our NATO alliance. In view of all the geopolitical challenges we are facing, the NATO alliance and how everybody contributes to NATO, how we can increase our joint and common resilience and security, that is like really the focus of our political and security, our security work. Then another part which is very important for us is our trade relationship. The US is Luxembourg's largest trading partner, but by far, our trade with the US is more than our trade with the whole of Asia. So it's really considerable. And we have a structurally negative trade balance with the US. So we import much more than we export. So it has been like that. The US has been an important investor in Luxembourg, and we have been also an important investor in the US. Another issue which I hinted at before, which is part of the trade and part of the national security issues, is space. So we are founding members of the Artemis Accords because of our whole investment in space. So this is something we work along with NASA, we work along with the private sector, but we also work along with the Pentagon and the Space Force on more national security issues. So that's a little bit in a nutshell the main issues we work with, and of course with our diaspora and the wider Friends of Luxembourg and Embassy has to do a lot of that. And I would say I leave it here so that we have plenty of time to discuss and to engage. Is that okay? Yeah? Thank you. The floor is yours.
Please, Jeff, as we said, raise your hand. We'll go until 1:45, just given her schedule. That's when we need to end.
Yeah, I kept on looking at the clock.
Hi, I'm Scott. I'm studying economics here at BYU, and I'm going to set this down. Well, I was first exposed to Luxembourg at the World's Fair in Dubai while I was working there, and I got to go down the slide. It was a great pavilion. But I was curious, kind of in the spirit of that international cultural diplomacy, coming from Luxembourg and the culture, is there something, a lesson that a lot of the people of Luxembourg have learned that you would like to communicate to the people of the United States of America in terms of what you value and what we see as we're kind of at a cultural crossroads within our own country and things are getting stress tested in Washington, a message you want to share with the American people?
Right. Well, thank you so much. Very exciting that you were in Dubai. I was actually there to put the first ideas when I was in the UAE, to put down the first idea of our pavilion. So I never managed to go down the slide. But secretly, I think that project was chosen because of the slide. We had the pavilion with a slide inside. But yeah, to come back to your question, I think the most important qualities we need in this world is open-mindedness. This is me speaking personally, open-mindedness and empathy. And just be open and tolerant and agree to listen to each other and to try to understand the person you are speaking with. I was talking to Rosie about this over lunch, because it's only by starting to listen to the other person and the other person listening to you that even if we disagree, then we, eventually can find some common grounds. And I think it's just this openness and tolerance, respect, dignity, all these values rather than shouting out there, and show compassion, show understanding, and be ready to listen. And then normally you get listened to as well. Yes.
I really don't want to take this opportunity from a student, but you're a diplomat. We would not expect you to come and say bad things about our country, and I'm not inviting that, but can you please help us understand a little bit what's going through the minds of Europeans right now with regard to the United States? Frustrations, concerns, adaptations, both among European people and among the leaders.
Thank you so much. No, of course. I mean, we need to be down to earth. That's why we're having these discussions. I think it's all of what you mentioned, but I think there is also opportunity. So I lived in China for a while, as you know, and the word of crisis is Wei Ji. It's danger and opportunity. So let's seize that. So there's definitely a lot of apprehension. We are trying to understand what is going on, and that's where I feel that our role at the embassy, together with Nina, where's Nina? There, is extremely important. Why do I also say opportunity? Europe in general, the European Union in general, has worked much better when there was a crisis. I mean, I'm not saying there is a crisis, but when, let's say, there were challenges and issues, and then normally the European Union works, over. So, and I think there is a big opportunity that also Europe needs to get its act together on a number of issues to better work with the US. European Union and the US, and Europe at large and the US, we are so important natural partners. We are allies. We are friends. Just between Europe and the US, there is $4 billion worth every day of goods crossing the Atlantic. We have trade relations there of 1.7 trillion every year. So, just on trade, and then comes security, then comes NATO, and then our whole value system, our democracies. So all these things make that this transatlantic relationship is stellar most important. So we have to make sure to keep it to work, and people know it. I mean, when you talk in Washington, you have on the one hand all the noise, everything we read in social media, we read in the press, and we hear, and then you have the engagement with people quietly, and it's a very different tone. So I say, let's seize it. We need to readjust certain things. We have a terrible war going on in Europe. And even in the Balkans, and Nina is here, there are other flashpoints which are heating up. And we can only deal with that when we work together. So we need to, what we have done, also certain things haven't worked. So we need to find new ways. Of course, are you really going... There are different tactics how you go about it. We don't choose the tactics. Everybody chooses his own tactics. So we have to deal with these. So I would say for me, the glass is definitely more than half full. Yes.
I'm very curious about what it's like to be a citizen in a country with 3 official languages. Do you find that there are dynamics between the different languages? Like, is French seen as more elevated, or do people of a lower class speak French? Is everyone's native language Luxembourgish? I'd love to hear what the... Does everyone speak all 3? What are those dynamics like?
This is an interesting question because I think it has been changing quite a lot. So both my parents were Luxembourgish, and I was born and raised in Luxembourg, so my first language is Luxembourgish. I speak at home. But, as I told you before, 50% of our residents are not Luxembourgish. So it's not spoken by really all that many people. the most used language when I go into a shop is French, because most of the people who work in the shops and restaurants are cross-border people. So you kind of have to speak French, and they understand English more and more. But I wouldn't say and French is really the language we use for the administration, because our laws are based on the Napoleonic codes rather than on the German codes. So that's why our whole administration, when I write a report, I write it in French, even though I consider French to be a very foreign language to me. But this is how it is. So I wouldn't say it's a hierarchy. English is definitely becoming much more dominant. German is a language we kind of understand. A Luxembourgish person like me understands the best, because that's what because it's so close to what we speak. So what is changing now for foreigners living in Luxembourg, maybe Tim knows that, for foreigners living in Luxembourg, if they want to get Luxembourg citizenship, they have to learn the language. So now what I find, and I don't know, Tim, you can speak to that, what I find, I know a number of foreigners, they are so proud now to learn Luxembourgish. They don't need to have like super high Shakespeare type knowledge of Luxembourgish, no, but they are really proud to learn it, because, or, you know, to learn at least this working level language to integrate. Even though when you walk through the street, you hardly hear anybody speak Luxembourgish, because people are from all over the place. So I don't think there's any hierarchy. It's more depending on where your origins are. I have to admit, for some kids who have learned to read and write in German, and then have all of a sudden to start to do math and history and geography in French, is a steep learning curve. So I think all these things are being reevaluated at the moment. So it's complicated. Yes, Tim.
Perspective. I just had one point of perspective. It shocked me that essentially high school in Luxembourg is a year longer than it is in the U.S. But when kids graduate, they graduate speaking fluently Luxembourgish, French, German, English, and many of them speak Portuguese or another language.
Spanish, yeah.
And so they take an extra year, but they've got a wide depth of language expertise.
Yeah, and again, it comes from where we are and so many different people living in the country. Of course.
Tell me a little bit about all the... Yeah, thank you. So with immigrant workers who are coming in from other countries, how is the border crossing? How does that work security-wise and transportation being landlocked, like you mentioned?
Right. Yes, you know that the European Union, we had the Schengen agreements. Now I cannot remember the date of the Schengen agreements, but it's around 2000 or even more longer ago. The Schengen agreements. Have you heard about the Schengen agreements? You know where Schengen is? Yes, but where? It is actually in Luxembourg. So it's a little hamlet at the border of France, Germany, and Luxembourg. So they actually boarded to sign the Schengen treaties. They boarded a boat in Schengen and anchored it at where the three countries meet to sign the Schengen treaties to abolish not border crossings, but checks to abolish border checks. So basically, once you enter the Schengen territory, which is most of the EU, but not all, you put your passport once, and that's it. And for the rest, you just cruise around. So, but Richard, your question is very relevant, because then happens COVID. And then all of a sudden, countries panic. And so they start closing the borders. And that became really tough for us, especially when the Germans closed the borders. Because most of when half your workforce, even though a lot of people stayed at home, but half of our nurses, a lot of doctors, a lot of the essential workers crossed the border every day. So the borders were closed. So during COVID, we had to find these agreements with France, Belgium, and Germany to keep the borders open for these people. So now borders are open again. I know that some border checks are back in place from the German side, I think. But in general, the essence of the EU is to keep the borders open, and with no border checks, and that is like for the movement of people, but also for the movement of goods. So having this single market, and this is something we are trying to also tell the US. We are not 27 different countries, but we are like one single market of 500 million people. And even though countries, of course, keep their own identity, and the EU should only really take over where it makes sense to work together, like in trade or certain rules, but they don't take over our sovereignty. So.
Hi. So I don't have a big knowledge on Luxembourg. One thing I do hear is that you guys have a very high GDP per capita. You guys have a lot of money. And so I guess my question is what is it that makes it like that in Luxembourg? You said that you're actually a trade deficit with the United States. I was just wondering, is it the diversity? Is it the trade? What is it that makes you guys so well off GDP wise?
So thank you so much. That's a very legitimate question. One of the reasons, one of the explanations I just gave you is that half of our workforce contributing to the GDP actually comes from abroad. So you have actually like twice as large a workforce than we have people. So, they of course create a huge GDP. And another contributing factor is, of course, that we have a very big financial sector, accounting for about 30% of our economy, where we have a lot of assets coming in and going out again. So that also creates it creates a lot of it adds to the GDP. Calculations also on that front. So, and because you are so small and then so open, so we are really like a platform, and then we are not so many people, and the service, the GDP, a lot of it is generated from the service industry, which is of course has a lot of funds, so it gets much higher than if you have more. Industry, even though we have industry as well. Maybe a little trivia for that. We have Goodyear, you all know, the Goodyear tires. So they set up, after the Marshall Plan, after World War II, they set up production facilities and research facilities in Luxembourg. And you know where the tires of the beast are made? So I just want you to go back with some trivia in your mind after this, So the tires of the beast are made in Luxembourg, where they have these highly specialized truck tire production facilities. So. I think we have time for one more question. Okay. Yes, here's one.
Awesome. My name is Will, and I'm studying economics and international relations. And just one question I have is, please correct me if I'm wrong, but for much of Luxembourg's history, it's been situated between France and Germany, which are these two huge states that have oftentimes been at odds with each other, which seems to me like it might be a really tough geopolitical situation to be in. How did that really affect Luxembourg's history, like pre-European Union and everything, and how does that impact kind of its geopolitical kind of outlook and like sort of how things work today, if that makes sense?
Right. So as I mentioned before, I brushed over it, but when we were created, so first, in the early 19th century, we kind of broke out also. Our creation came after the disintegration of the Napoleonic Empire, because again, the Germans didn't want us to go to the French, and the French didn't want us to be part of the Prussian Empire. So we were always this kind of playing ball, being pushed around between these two big warring, huge warring factions. And this is why actually in the 19th century, when then the German empire, the Prussian Empire disintegrated, that's when at the Treaty of London in 1869, Luxembourg became a neutral country. So that once and for all, the fortifications were dismantled and nobody was allowed to meddle with it anymore. So we got this neutrality so that nobody would touch us. And that was, the big powers decided that for us. And then, of course, come the world wars, come our engagement in the multilateral community. So what still is now, we still very much, not very much, but we still act like as a bridge sometimes between the two countries. I mean, our foreign minister with whom I was recently, he was still saying when he was with Madame Merkel and Monsieur Hollande at the time, they didn't speak English, so Monsieur Hollande, the French president, spoke French, and Madame Merkel spoke German. So, and our minister, who was then prime minister, he would listen to Madame Merkel, and then he would translate. And then while Madame Merkel was speaking, Mr. Hollande was already saying, "What is she saying? Qu'est-ce qu'elle dit? Qu'est-ce qu'elle dit?" And then, and then when Monsieur Hollande was saying, Madame Merkel saying, "Was sagt er denn? Was sagt er denn? Come." So we still very much, because we, in Luxembourg, it really, we bridge between the two very different cultures also. I mean, the Germans and French are, does anybody speak German in here? Oh yes, a lot of German speakers also. But you see, it's very different cultures. So we managed to speak to the two of them. But the two are very important to us because, of course, our economy is extremely integrated with these two countries. So, like the founding father of the European Union, Robert Schuman, who went to become the French foreign minister, he was actually born in Luxembourg. So you see, it's kind of all not really it's in the DNA of things that we feel we need to work with all of our neighbors. And having been pretty much destroyed in World War II, that kind of really pushed us to make sure that this will not happen again.
Thank you. Join me one more time.